Hi, DrBiology here. This is lesson 3 of the specific immune response related to A-level biology, and in the AQA Spec 3.2.4, cell recognition and immunity. Okay, so just a quick spec check. Remember, your specification is your friend. The reason being that the spec tells you exactly what you're going to be examined on. So this video is going to be related to this section here, related to what we call the cellular response, and then this section here, which is related to what we call the humoral response in terms of B cells producing antibodies. So the first question is, what is immune response? Well, the body has a specific response to a specific antigen. Whilst this process is slower than phagocytosis, they provide long-term immunity to a specific pathogen. So we're interested about lymphocytes. So if we look here, we're looking at T lymphocytes or T cells and B lymphocytes or B cells. So T lymphocytes or T cells, they mature in the thymus gland and they're involved in the cellular response, responding to an organism's own cells that have been infected, for example, by a virus. B cells, they mature in the bone marrow, and they are involved with what we call humoral immunity, involving antibodies released into body fluids such as blood plasma. So the first thing we're going to look at is the involvement of T cells in the cellular response. So there are a vast number of different T cells, so each one responds to a single shape of a foreign antigen. So the receptor proteins, they bind to what we call complementary antigens. So here we have a T cell and you can see the receptor protein there, okay, and it has a complementary shape there related to the antigen, which is that part there. So we saw in the previous lesson that phagocytes, they present the pathogens antigens once they have destroyed them. So there are different types of T cells, and there are many different types of T cells, but in the AQA spec they want you to know about helper T cells and cytotoxic T cells. So TH cells, helper cells, they release chemicals that activate and stimulate phagocytes. They also activate B cells, which then secrete antibodies. Cytotoxic T cells, on the other hand, they're stimulated by T helper cells to kill abnormal and foreign cells by making holes in their cell surface membrane. So here we have a phagocyte, and the phagocyte is presenting the antigen, and then the T helper cell receptor fits that particular antigen, and then it can clone by mitosis to produce lots of different T cells. So we'll talk about memory cells later on in another video, but also it stimulates B cells to divide by mitosis, stimulates phagocytosis, and cytotoxic T cells, they kill infected cells by making holes in the cell surface membrane. So a reminder with this type of response, this is related to a cellular response, so it responds to an organism's own cells that have been infected, for example, by a virus. So next, let's look at what we call a humoral response, where antibodies are produced by B cells. So on the right hand side I've got a picture of an antibody. In my next video I'm going to talk a bit more about the structure and function of antibodies, but all I need to tell you now is that they are proteins and they are able to be specific and respond to a specific antigen. So it bonds to form what we call an antibody-antigen complex. Now, to begin with, in the humoral response, T cells stimulate the correct type of B cell to divide by mitosis, and this forms a clone of identical B cells, and it produces many millions of B cells, all of which produce the antibody that is specific to the foreign antigen. So there are two types of B cells. So first of all, plasma cells. So these secrete antibodies. So it says here around 2,000 every second, and these are called monoclonal antibodies. That's because they are identical. So plasma cells survive only for a few days, and the antibodies lead to the destruction of the antigen and therefore the pathogen. So we will be going on, as I said, in the next video to look at that in more detail. So this is what we call the primary immune response. The second type of B cells are called memory cells. So these are ones that live longer, often decades, in your blood and your lymph vessels, and these cells do not produce antibodies directly, but when they encounter the same antigen at a later date, they divide rapidly and develop into plasma and more memory cells. These provide long-term immunity against the original infection. So in this diagram, I'm interested in the activated T helper cells. So they, once they have identified the type of antigen, they then start to clone. Well, the B cells are then cloned, the correct B cells are cloned, and to produce either plasma cells, so producing antibodies that can attach and destroy the pathogen, or memory cells which remain and circulate in blood and tissue fluid for many, many years, and that's what we call a secondary response. So that was a quick summary of the specific immune response. Next lesson I'm going to do on immunity is related to antibodies and how your body responds to primary and secondary infections. I hope you've liked it. If you have, please do subscribe to DrBiology. Thank you.